And I said, I took up the courage to ask her, I said, Mr. Robinson, I'm writing an essay on investment and I don't have a clue about that. So she said, child, let me tell you, investment is made in the present, where the past is irrevocable and the future is unknown. What she was trying to tell me was that given the nature of investment in a capitalist society where it's made by individual entrepreneurs, there's no inherent reason why aggregate investment should necessarily be just exactly equal to what is required for achieving full employment given production capacity. So she was sort of explaining Keynes to me in a very gentle, subtle, complex fashion. But that idea of hers remained with me. And I soon discovered that Joan had actually done most of her work subsequently on looking at the issue of investment in an underdeveloped country. And there, the issue is not how to achieve full utilization of existing productive capacity, as Keynes was concerned with, but rather how to achieve capital accumulation, how to develop productive capacity to a point where you can provide employment and improve welfare to everybody. So now capital accumulation here again, Professor Robinson's view was that in an underdeveloped country within a capitalist framework, it's very difficult to achieve high rates of capital accumulation simply because of the high consumption of the potential investors, the capitalists, particularly in the rural areas. And so that is one of the reasons why Professor Joan Robinson began learning the lessons from China. Her second major sort of message to me as a 17, 18-year-old, and she put it very simply. She said, child, economics is about building a humane society. That's the purpose of the subject. And I think it's these two concerns, the concerns of capital accumulation in an underdeveloped country and the building of a humane society, which became the basis of her examination of China. Now, what did she say? You see, again, she challenged the existing orthodoxy. The existing orthodoxy regarding choice of technique was the Soviet one. The Soviet orthodoxy was that if you want to maximize the rate of growth, you maximize the investment in heavy industry. Now, this arose out of a famous paper by Professor Feldman. Dr. Pervez Tahir has referred to it in terms of the Sen-Dobb model, but actually the Sen-Dobb-Feldman model. And if you look at the book Papers on Development and Planning by Dobb, he's actually presented the model that Feldman presented. And basically, Feldman was going a step further than the Harrod-Doma model type sort of framework. He was saying that the rate of growth is determined not only by the level of investment, but by the percentage of investment going into heavy industry. Now, the logic there was that if you focus and concentrate investment on heavy industry, which is going to be more capital intensive, you have a larger surplus being generated because they're going to employ fewer workers. So you spend less money on the wage bill, and therefore you get larger surpluses. And these surpluses, when you keep reinvesting, you'll end up with a much higher rate of growth. Now, Feldman, being a brilliant economist, was quite aware that this model was not sustainable for any length of time. So therefore, he said that this is a two-stage model. Because when you start concentrating on heavy industry, you will generate high rates of growth, but you will run out of, there will be a shortage of wage goods, shortage of consumer goods for your workers and your peasants. And therefore, at some stage, you've got to shift away from heavy industry and achieve a better balance between heavy and light industry and between industry and agriculture. That was his idea. Of course, the Soviets didn't look at the second stage of the model because they began to focus on building a kind of military capability against the US during the Cold War. And so they continued to focus on heavy industry and rapid economic growth and rapid industrialization, and ended up with a major shortage of consumer goods, which was one of the reasons why the Soviet Union broke up. They ran short of consumer goods. Okay, but now what Joan Robinson was arguing was very different from Feldman, Dog, Sen. By the way, Sen's choice of techniques, which was his PhD thesis, was saying exactly what Feldman was saying, that the choice of a capital-intensive technique will maximize GDP growth because capital intensity means you have a larger surplus between the wage bill and the total revenue. So you have a larger gap between the wage bill and the total revenue. So Sen is essentially saying the same thing as Feldman. And it's also very similar to what Mahalanobis was saying in India in the 1950s. That's why India went into heavy industry first. So in any event, the reason why Joan Robinson began to admire, you might call it starry-eyed, Dr. Ghai, but the reason why she began to admire the Chinese choice of the more labor-intensive technique was simply because she argued on grounds of humaneness that, for one thing, you are providing a larger employment to your people through this labor-intensive technique. And the second is that if the labor-intensive technique is efficient, then you're generating more output per unit of capital. And that is why a labor-intensive technique in China is preferable to capital-intensive, or focus entirely on heavy industry to begin with. Now, the other thing about agriculture, the Chinese obviously initially began to explore possibilities of raising agriculture productivity and achieving a more balanced growth between agriculture and industry. The logic of this policy is rooted in their resource endowments and the very different resource situation compared to the Soviet Union earlier on. And secondly, it also had to do with the nature of the Chinese Revolution in contrast to the Soviet Revolution. You see, in the Soviet Union case, the farm area per head of the population was 2.5 acres. They had enough land. They didn't have to go for increasing agriculture productivity to begin with. In the Chinese case, the per acre availability of land was 0.5 acres. So there was no way they could get away from investment and growth in the agriculture sector. And the other reason, of course, was that the Chinese Revolution was brought about essentially by a peasant-based party, as opposed to the Soviet Revolution, which was an urban-based party, a worker-based party. And so, you see, Joan Robinson's concern and her support for the idea of using employment-intensive, labor-intensive techniques and putting agriculture in the forefront, at least to begin with, was rooted in the nature of the Chinese Revolution on the one hand, and on sound technical grounds, if you wanted to focus on human beings. It was the human dimension, I think, which Professor Joan Robinson was most concerned with. Now, in the long sort of view, what is it that we can learn from her emphasis on using economics to build a more humane society? which was my first lesson to me personally. Um, we are now in a period when we have a lot of work done by Professor Amartya Sen to show that if you focus on human beings and develop their human capabilities, that in fact you can have a more efficient economy. There are three sort of dimensions to a new kind of economic policy for Pakistan, if we have to focus on human beings. The first is that we have to make the basic services of health, good quality education, and unemployment benefits, social security, available to all citizens. It's not a question of a social policy that is marginal to our concern with growth. Providing high quality health, education, and social security on a universal basis is central to increasing or accelerating GDP growth. Simply because if you have a healthier population and a more skilled or educated population, you have a more productive population. And if you provide social security to everybody, you build a stake in the system for all citizens. And recent research by Professor Easterly, etc., has shown that more cohesive societies also achieve higher long-term economic growth. So the universal provision of health, education, and social security would be integral to a new sort of economic growth path, which focuses on human beings, but is yet also productive. The second aspect of this policy of rethinking is to build an institutional structure which provides equality of opportunity to all citizens. We are a society and an economy that is focused on the rich, that provides opportunities to the rich, but denies an overwhelming majority of the people of the minimum material conditions of civilized human existence. We've got to shift away from that situation. We've got to have an institutional structure that provides equality of opportunity to all citizens. This is the aspect of the focus on human beings, the second aspect of the focus on human beings that I was talking about. The third aspect is that the process of economic growth and changes in the institutional structure also require or are involved with changing the structure of power itself. Because if you have a structure of power where the elite dominates, then you're going to have economic policy and even institutional policy which benefits them rather than the rest of the people. So a change in the power structure at the top would become an integral part of building a more humane society. Now, if you were to do all three, then you would need to devise new ways of evaluating economic progress. At the moment, we have an economy that works for the rich. We've got to build an economy that works for the poor. The measure of progress has to be not simply the increase in GDP growth rate. The measure of progress has to be what percentage of the population is able to actualize its potential. What percentage of the population has better healthcare, has better education, is able to make a productive contribution to the economy and to society. So the very measure of progress would have to change. And the fact is that if, at a broader level, If you create an institutional structure and a process of resource allocation which enables the actualization of the productive potential of the people, and then these people whose capabilities have been actualized and developed are placed into positions where they can use their talents and capabilities, then obviously growth would be an outcome of such a policy. Growth would follow. But what is more important, perhaps, or equally important, is that in actualizing the potential of a society, you have not only a more dynamic economy, but you're able to make a contribution to civilization. There will be a flowering of civilization in every sphere of human endeavor, whether in the arts or in the social sciences. You will be making a contribution to the world. So I'll end there. And thank once again Dr. Parvez Tahir for, I think, combining meticulous scholarship with a very fine sense of appreciation of Joan Robinson's personality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Kasman Hussain, sharing his thoughts and comments about Joan